Shane van Gisbergen's Chicagoland controversy wasn't over, even after NASCAR made its decision, because that's exactly what happened after the controversial Chicagoland clash between Shane van Gisbergen and Austin Hill. The contact sparked outrage across the NASCAR community. Some fans demanded a penalty for SVG. Others insisted it was simply hard racing. Even before NASCAR had announced its decision, debates were already spreading across social media about whether officials would step in. Then NASCAR finally revealed its verdict. But here's the part almost nobody expected. Even after clearing Shane van Gisbergen of any rule violation, NASCAR still decided it wanted both SVG and Austin Hill sitting down with officials before the next race weekend. So if NASCAR believed no rules were broken, why are both drivers still being called to the hauler? And could this meeting be a warning that the rivalry is far from over? Stay with us until the end, because we'll break down NASCAR's reasoning, Austin Hill's reaction, SVG's response, and why Richard Childress still refuses to let this incident go. Before we get started, if you enjoy honest NASCAR news and in-depth race analysis, be sure to subscribe to NASCAR Nation News and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates. Now, let's get into it. The controversy started during the closing stages of the Xfinity Series race at Chicagoland. By that point, Austin Hill and Shane van Gisbergen had already spent much of the afternoon racing each other aggressively. Neither driver wanted to give up track position, and every lap seemed to add a little more tension between them. Then everything changed in a matter of seconds. As the two battled for position, contact between their cars sent Austin Hill spinning into the outside wall, ending his hopes of fighting for a strong finish. The moment immediately became one of the biggest talking points of the weekend. Almost instantly, fans were divided. Some believed SVG had intentionally driven into Austin Hill after the two had raced each other so hard throughout the day. Others argued that this was simply another example of two drivers pushing the limit while fighting for valuable track position. Because of how dramatic the incident looked, many expected NASCAR to issue some form of penalty after reviewing the race. Instead, officials reached a different conclusion. After examining the available evidence, including video footage, radio communication, and SMT data, NASCAR announced that Shane van Gisbergen would not receive any disciplinary action. Naturally, that decision created another wave of debate. If the contact looked so serious, why wasn't NASCAR taking action? According to NASCAR Managing Director of Racing Communications Mike Forde, the answer came down to one word: intent. Mike Forde explained that NASCAR must be convinced a driver intentionally retaliated before issuing a penalty. After reviewing everything available from the incident, officials concluded there simply wasn't enough evidence to prove Shane van Gisbergen deliberately wrecked Austin Hill. In other words, NASCAR wasn't saying the contact never happened. Officials were saying they couldn't prove it was intentional. That distinction became the biggest reason no penalty was issued. However, NASCAR also made it clear that the situation wasn't being ignored. Instead of handing out punishment, officials chose another approach. They announced that both Austin Hill and Shane van Gisbergen would meet with NASCAR before competition begins this weekend. That immediately raised another question. If there wasn't enough evidence to justify a penalty, why was a meeting still necessary? The answer has less to do with what already happened and more to do with what NASCAR wants to prevent from happening next. NASCAR's answer is actually pretty simple. Officials don't believe this rivalry is over. By bringing both drivers to the hauler, NASCAR isn't changing its decision or preparing a late penalty. Instead, it's trying to make sure emotions from Chicagoland don't spill over into the next race. Mike Forde explained that even though officials didn't find enough evidence to penalize Shane van Gisbergen, they still felt it was important to talk with both drivers. The goal is to hear each driver's perspective, remind them of NASCAR's expectations, and make sure the situation doesn't escalate. It's a proactive move, rather than a disciplinary one. In other words, NASCAR is trying to stop the next controversy before it happens. Austin Hill, however, wasn't completely satisfied with that outcome. After learning there would be no penalty, Austin Hill admitted he was disappointed. From his point of view, the contact wasn't just hard racing. Austin Hill said, "I don't agree with the decision, but that's NASCAR's call." He also confirmed that he'll attend the meeting with officials and move forward, but it's clear he still believes the incident crossed the line. For Austin Hill, the frustration isn't just about one crash, it's about accountability. He believes drivers should be held responsible when aggressive racing goes too far, and in his opinion, that's exactly what happened at Chicagoland. Shane van Gisbergen, meanwhile, viewed the incident from a completely different perspective. Shane van Gisbergen never suggested he was trying to send Austin Hill into the wall. Instead, he described it as two drivers racing each other extremely hard while fighting for position late in the race. From his standpoint, it wasn't retaliation, it was simply the result of intense competition. That explanation closely matched NASCAR's own findings. Officials reviewed every angle they had available and simply couldn't prove the contact was intentional. And that's an important point. NASCAR has never said drivers can't race aggressively. The line is crossed only when officials believe someone intentionally uses a race car as retaliation. According to NASCAR's review, this incident didn't meet that standard. That doesn't mean NASCAR considers the matter completely finished. In fact, by calling both drivers to the hauler, officials are making it clear they'll be paying close attention the next time these two share the racetrack. If another similar incident happens in the coming weeks, the conversation could become very different. That's why this meeting matters. It's less about what happened at Chicagoland and more about making sure history doesn't repeat itself. Of course, not everyone inside the garage agrees with NASCAR's decision. Richard Childress made that clear almost immediately after the race. The Richard Childress racing owner publicly accused Shane van Gisbergen of intentionally wrecking Austin Hill and didn't hide his frustration over what he believed happened on the racetrack. Even after NASCAR announced there would be no penalty, Childress's opinion didn't change. He still believes Austin Hill was intentionally taken out, making him one of the strongest voices disagreeing with NASCAR's conclusion. And that's what makes this story so interesting. One side believes NASCAR made the correct decision because there wasn't enough evidence to prove intent. The other side believes the incident was obvious and deserved punishment. For NASCAR, however, the investigation is over. The penalty isn't coming, but the conversation certainly is. Now all eyes turn to the next race weekend. When Shane van Gisbergen and Austin Hill finally meet with NASCAR officials, everyone will be watching to see whether this rivalry cools down or whether Chicagoland becomes the first chapter of an even bigger story later this season. Because if these two drivers find themselves battling for position again, every move they make will be under the microscope. And if another controversial incident happens, don't expect NASCAR to ignore it twice. The next decision could look very different. What do you think? Did NASCAR make the right call by not penalizing Shane van Gisbergen, or should Austin Hill have received justice after Chicagoland? Let us know your opinion in the comments below.